Back in 2012, a certain group started facing dangerous hatred in Iraq. This hatred gradually evolved from angry language, to warnings, to threats, to murder. What was this group, you ask? A minority? Maybe a sexual orientation? Immigrants? Migrants? Well, no. It was emo kids. Before we start, I'm sure you've all got New Year's goals, and HelloFresh is here to help you achieve them. You can go ahead and skip the whole grocery store thing and take control of your time and budget with great tasting recipes delivered right to your door. It's a great way to both eat well and save money this year. You can cut back on more expensive takeout and delivery and get started with HelloFresh instead. You'll love how fast, easy, and affordable it is to whip up a restaurant-quality meal right in your own home. HelloFresh's latest line of meals features robust flavors and filling proportions and are able to be ready in less than 15 minutes. Enjoy the taste, speed, and quality of recipes like falafel power bowls, seared steak and potatoes with béarnaise sauce, or Southwest pork and bean burritos. For today's video, I decided to try out the one-pan beef enchiladas verdes. I've never really been good at making stuff like this, but it turned out perfectly and tasted fantastic thanks to the directions. Definitely great stuff, and I'll be ordering it again. Eating well is at the top of the mind this month, and it's comforting to know you always get top quality with HelloFresh. Ingredients travel from farm to you in less than 7 days, so you know they're fresh. So go to HelloFresh.com and use code DIRETRIP21 for 21 free meals plus free shipping. Once again, go to HelloFresh.com and use code DIRETRIP21 for 21 free meals plus free shipping. And now, on to the content. So let's go way back to the beginning. Back in the day, sexual minorities on Iraq were given what I guess you would call the bare minimum amount of freedom. In general, it seems that people were allowed to do what they wanted to do as long as they kept it private and didn't bring it out in public. Granted, the country was nowhere near accepting of these groups, they were just more willing to turn a blind eye as long as they weren't making a scene. This lasted until about 2003 when the US invaded Iraq. It was at this time that the ultra-conservative, ultra-religious Islamic Dawa Party came into power and these minorities started facing heavy persecution. Human Rights Watch says that, since 2004, hundreds and hundreds of gay men have been killed in Iraq, with many of them being carried out by Iraqi security forces themselves. They were government-sanctioned killings. The killers would even brazenly break into the homes of the victims or just kidnap them off the street in broad daylight. When they did so, they would often interrogate these men to find the names of other gay men, then they would execute them and mutilate the bodies. Often they would leave the body to be found in public as some sort of a warning. By 2007, this operation was in full swing. The religious organizations in the country were hosting a coordinated campaign to hunt down, kidnap, torture, and eventually kill anyone that they thought of as gay. Remember that, the person didn't have to actually be gay, they just had to be perceived as gay. That's really all it took. Human rights activists began to describe Iraq as a devastated society with a broken political process and fractured public, saying that the people of the country had gradually begun to find otherness intolerable after decades of degradation. You're probably thinking, isn't this a video about emo people? What does this have to do with anything? Well, there's a very simple answer to that question. The religious and moral authorities thought that emo people were pretty gay looking. I'm not kidding, that really is most of it. Back in 2011, emo fashion and the subculture in general quickly started gaining popularity in the Middle East. It had previously gained some traction in other Middle Eastern countries before finding its way out into Iraq. Most people associate emo fashion with long bangs, black hair, eyeliner, and tight clothes. However, the Arab world associated it more with homosexuality and Satanism, two things that you definitely don't want to be associated with in the Middle East. In fact, just a few years prior, the police in Saudi Arabia had arrested about 10 women with emo fashion for allegedly causing what they called a public disturbance in a coffee shop. In reality, it's more likely that they were just looking for an excuse to arrest them. Around the same time, conservative groups in Egypt were criticizing emo fashion as being disciples of Satan and pretty gay. The definition of emo by the authorities started getting gradually more and more vague once it came to the 2010s. Originally, it was meant to describe what I'm sure you imagine emo to look like, but gradually it came to describe a man whose hair was sort of long or happened to look feminine in really any way. Not only that, but conspiracy theories about the emo subculture began to circulate as well. Not only were they associated with homosexuality and Satanism, they also came to be viewed as vampires, practitioners of black magic, and for some reason, Freemasons? I guess you just can't really have a good conspiracy theory without throwing some Freemasons in there somewhere. It's also important to note that the emo phenomenon was considered to be a product of Western culture, and it goes without saying that Western culture wasn't looked upon favorably at the time. This brings us to the year 2012. The Islamic State was beginning to become a massive problem, terror attacks were occurring just about every month, and the country was in chaos. However, it seems that they had enough free time to really come down on the emo subculture. On the Iraqi Interior Ministry website itself, emo kids were criticized for wearing, quote, strange tight clothes with skulls on them and rings in their noses and tongues. It was here that they revealed that the morality police had been given approval by the Interior Ministry to eliminate them as soon as possible since it's detrimentally affecting the society and becoming a danger. A danger. Let that sink in for a minute. After this, anti-emo flyers were distributed throughout the most conservative areas of the country, going as far as threatening death if the perceived gay men didn't cut their hair and stop wearing the clothing of a devil worshipper. Emo, metal, and rap music was also to be eliminated. A teenager who went by Kamel spoke to CNN around this time, saying that he cut his slightly long hair out of fear that he might indirectly become a target. He said, "I'm not the only one. All my friends in the school decided to change their hairstyle and change their clothes too, even though we're not emo or gay." He said that a group of men identifying themselves as the moral police actually entered his classroom a few weeks prior and started encouraging the students to snitch on any of their classmates who might be perceived as suspicious or problematic. Needless to say, this left the teens pretty shook. I thought it was about terror, but later, when the police explained more, we realized that they were talking about emo, he said. One activist told CNN, 10 days ago I received a letter from militiamen threatening me that if they found me, then they will not kill me like the other perverts, but they will cut my body into pieces. Which, would probably kill a person. The man had to remain anonymous for obvious reasons. But he was able to give CNN a copy of a letter that was distributed within his city, one that identified 33 different gay and emo threats. Leaflets were then distributed all around the city with the full names of these men. Basically, they were doxxed by the government. They were listed as being gay and threatened with death unless they changed their ways and stopped behaving like the people of Lot. It read, "Your fate will be death if you don't quit doing this. Punishment will be tougher and tougher, you gays. Don't be like the people of Lot." Another flyer circulating at the time was addressed specifically to young emo teens and 20-somethings. It ordered them to cut their hair, change their clothing, and to stop listening to their music. They were told that, if they refused, Allah's punishment will come down upon you. We strongly warn every male and female debauchee. If you do not stop this dirty act within 4 days, then the punishment of Allah will fall on you at the hands of the Mujahideen, it continued. One young man with longer hair spoke up about the situation. He was worried that he might be lumped in with the emo crowd because of his slightly Western appearance. "I have long hair, but that doesn't mean I'm an emo. I'm not less of a man if I have long hair. Let's not say that if I have long hair I'm a homosexual, but I have long hair because this is my style. This is me," he told a television network within the country. Another said that a number of students had just recently been arrested because they were wearing jeans or because they had more Western-looking haircuts. And then a string of murders of emo men across Baghdad came to prove that these weren't mere threats. They were actually killing these people. People within both the emo and the gay communities weren't even really sure where these killings were coming from. Was it something regular citizens were carrying out on their own, or was it something that the government itself was doing? If that was the case, then they couldn't even go to the police, and there was no chance that the government would protect them from further violence. Throughout the first 3 weeks of these attacks, at least 14 people were known to have been killed, according to a senior Interior Ministry official. Human rights activists asserted that this number was actually much higher, with up to about 100 people thought to have been murdered in this wave. Most of the killings were said to have taken place in the Shiite neighborhoods within Amin, Tariq, Shula, and Sadr City. That pronunciation is probably really bad, but bear with me. More and more details began to surface about the murders. It came to even be known that most of these young men were even tortured before they were killed. And even worse, the killings weren't stopping. The teenagers, mainly the ones wearing tight or black clothing, were being picked up by religious extremists who took them into secluded locations and crushed their heads with cement blocks. The moral police released a statement further condemning the emo culture, and the media started to portray the young men as Mossad agents who were covertly trying to spread perversion and Satanism throughout society. The gay community was used to this treatment. Over the past 6 years, as many as 750 gay men were beaten and killed by Islamist militias throughout Baghdad. Many of them had decided to either leave the country or live very, very deep in the closet for their own safety. However, the young men simply dressing in black and growing out their bangs didn't expect to be given this treatment. They wondered how far this would go as they continued to live in fear. Even if they changed their appearance now, they were already branded, and it was likely that they were probably already pretty screwed. According to Al Arabiya News, religious extremists working for the Ministry of the Interior were behind this, disguising themselves as normal civilians in order to deflect blame from the government. Once they brandished their disguises, they would lead groups of teenagers to remote areas and stone them with concrete blocks. They then took pictures of the aftermath and threw them into the trash. In other areas, the teens were pushed from the tops of buildings to their deaths. Either way, the photos taken of the bodies were released to the public and quickly started to circulate on social media. Rest assured, this leak of the images was made on purpose. This was intended to spread fear and act as a warning to anyone else who dared to wear jeans or grow out their hair. After a while, this treatment wasn't even limited to young men. Young women started to be rounded up and beaten as well. They wanted to really show that nobody who dressed in this fashion would be safe. In addition, many stores selling this fashion were burned to the ground as well. Basically, they said, conform or die. The hospitals began to fill in eastern Baghdad as teenagers with blunt force injuries were carted in one after another. One of these teens escaped and later was able to tell his story to the news, saying, "First, they throw concrete blocks at the boy's arms, then at his legs, and then the final blow is to his head. And if he is not dead then, they start all over again." Not all of them were killed in the same manner, though. Some of them were set up to look as if they had taken their own lives. It's not really known why this was done when making a scene and sending a message was such a priority. Maybe they thought that implying that some of them took their own lives out of fear would send an even bigger message, but that's pure speculation. Many of the youth in the area and some of the gay men decided to flee toward the northern side of the country after all this came out. Many others shaved off their hair or changed up their fashion entirely. The daily harassment was becoming too much to bear. Frighteningly, a good portion of the public was in full support of what the moral police were doing. Neighbors would shout at them, "Your turn is coming," and drive by chanting, "Block, block, block." One young man named Saeed became somewhat of the poster child for these murders as his picture was circulated around social media the most. Obviously, I can't really show the picture on this channel, but I can definitely say that it was clearly taken after a brutal attack. A friend of Saeed spoke out to the media, saying that he was killed because of his hairstyle. Another one of his friends had actually been killed in the same manner. At first, the government denied the killings entirely, saying, "Many media have reported fabricated news reports about the so-called emo phenomenon, stories of tens of young people killed in various ways, including stoning. No murder case has been recorded with the Interior Ministry on so-called emo grounds. All cases of murder recorded were for revenge, social, and common criminal reasons." The official account listed the total number of deaths as 6 at first. This was despite the fact that hospitals were able to clearly show that the numbers were actually much higher, anywhere from 14 to even as much as 100. Some news agency listed the number as about a dozen, some as a couple of dozen, some as around 70, and some as more. The total count was never consistent and isn't really known, but it's obvious that it was a very significant amount of people, and they definitely knew that at the time. International human rights groups demanded that the Iraqi government investigate the killing, still not knowing that they were likely behind the crimes themselves. They did at least feel that the killings were being done by the police or paramilitary groups. Government officials denied having any role in the killings, although they did say that emo teens were both stupid and unnatural. One spokesperson did specify that they should be dealt with through legal means, although it isn't really uncertain what they were doing that was actually illegal to even be dealt with. Surprisingly though, despite initial support from certain citizens, the attacks began to be condemned more and more throughout the country. The most influential Iraqi cleric at the time described the murders as being un-Islamic acts of terror. Many journalists condemned the acts of extremism and called for protection of freedom of expression. The government began to backtrack, saying that there was no campaign out there to persecute emo teens. They said that those stories were merely made up by those with a anti-government, anti-religious agenda. They even went as far as saying they would protect the teens. It was bullshit. However, the BBC interviewed around 17 gay men and former police from Baghdad, all of which had friends or relatives that were killed, and all of which confirmed that the Interior Ministry was behind all of it, even saying that the killings were still ongoing despite the public statements. Hearing of this, the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission and the Dutch government expanded its asylum policy towards threatened Iraqis within the gay community. Eventually, the killings did stop. The U.S. State Department's 2013 report on human rights in Iraq reported that the Council of Ministers established a committee in response to the issue and stated, formally, that LGBT people were no different from others and established a charter that would offer them basic protection. However, to this day, they still aren't treated well, to put it lightly. It doesn't really help that these emo teens were not gay. This charter doesn't even apply to them. So in the end, really, they were given nothing. The government simply got away with this, and everyone moved on. Once again, thank you for watching my video. Bit kind of a different story this time, but it's something I've wanted to cover for a while. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it helps out in the algorithm, and so do comments. Go ahead and subscribe if you want to see more weird and dark stuff like this. If you don't mind, go ahead and follow me on social media. If anything ever to happen to the channel, that would be the only way you'd ever hear about it. And if you want to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon account, which I keep linked down in the description below. Speaking of which, shout out to the top patrons. We've got Steph and Jamie Kramer, Max Sword Guy, L, Rain Noir, Pao Yang, April Diamond, Astral, Grack, Rick of Work in Progress USA, Sash Johnson, Buttery Frankus, Wafrans, Jules Latona, Arctic Cat, Alan Damiani, Adrian Lawley, Marsh, Rensenstein, Kim Peak, Lux Alpaca, Charity, Scoochie Main, Jackie, and Mark Barnett. You are all good. Once again, shout out to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check out their link in the description below. This has been your host Kyle, thank you, and good night.